Now, Anna, last time you and I had the chance to chat, we were having a really interesting conversation. You were saying that one of the biggest mistakes that you're seeing a lot of analysts in the field making today is that they're doing things too fast. They're rushing to get their reports to decision makers. And as a result, that's resulting in a lot of shoddy analysis. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that since OSINT has been on the rise for the past, I guess, decade or even more than that, a lot of corporate, intelligence departments use OSINT, which is great. But at the same time, I think that when we're rushing to answer our stakeholders, sometimes we run into misinformation, disinformation. Sometimes we forget who's the audience and what would be important and relevant for them. And then that kind of leads to a little bit of, mistakes. So, what I always think the best thing to do is, first of all, obviously, we all know as analysts, you have to verify your sources, making sure that you're not single sourcing and all that jazz. But also just take a tactical pause. Like, unless you're a first responder, my theory is, nobody's going to die. Um, it is important to be very fast, and even in corporate security, intelligence, as we're supporting a lot of different, very important stakeholders in the business. But also at the same time, I think it's very important to take that tactical pause and think, if your information is accurate.
Gotcha. I was feverishly writing down a lot of notes through the course of that answer because there's a couple of different directions I want to take this conversation. But I think before I kind of go into a lot of those points, one of the things that I'd be curious to ask is why do you feel maybe a lot of analysts are kind of stuck or feel stuck in this bad behavior of rushing reports and rushing their intelligence out the door versus taking the time to maybe marinate on things?
Yeah, I think a lot of times those things happen when we're dealing with like breaking events and tactical reports, as opposed to the more deep, in-depth analysis and strategic reports that a lot of the analysts do as well. So when it comes to breaking events and on the tactical side, obviously, all security professionals have this crisis management and response and life safety responsibilities. So part of it is just feeling the responsibility of needing to report as quickly as possible in order to enable our decision makers and stakeholders to make those decisions that they need in order to keep our people safe. But at the same time, I think it's also sometimes that adrenaline rush of like, I just want to get the answer out, and that's kind of what's causing a lot of people to rush.
See everything kind of happen on Twitter or on in the media, and it's like, okay, like you said, feeling the adrenaline to get something out the door really quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And also a lot of times it's like the confirmation bias, like there is a breaking event and we don't know sometimes the motive of, if it's an active shooter, and the motive of the shooter. We don't know sometimes, and it takes a little longer to dig if the police set a certain parameter or like radius for the shelter in place and things like that in order to be able to evaluate our next steps. Like, is the radius, impacting our offices, our people, and things like that. So yeah, it really is really important. Can't stress it enough to take that tactical pause.
Right. And like you said, I'm just thinking in a situation like an active shooter, I know from just my own experiences when I've seen these reports breaking, most of the information that's coming out in those first half an hour, 2 hours after the event breaks, it's notoriously unreliable. There's just so much misinformation that's usually flooded out. So I got to imagine lots of different situations. It's going to be pretty similar.
Yeah.
What are kind of the common or the unintended consequences that might come as a result of uh, that you've seen in the past from rushing a lot of these intelligence reports at the door?
I think sometimes it's just not, evaluating your source. I've made that mistake one time where I was reporting in a new job about a region in the world and an organization, like I guess a terrorist organization that I wasn't too familiar with. And I think it's really important to understand not only your source, but also like the different tactics and the way that, like the motives of that specific organization. So I saw something about, strikes by that organization, and it was a bit exaggerated on one hand, and then the uh, country that was being attacked was not reporting at all. But I just felt like, this is something I need to start drafting a report. And as I'm drafting the report, I come to find out that actually, you know, the attacker has the tendency to exaggerate and sensationalize like the actual, exaggerate their capabilities and the attack. And the other side actually, even when they are being attacked, they love to keep things quiet and not report that they're being attacked because they consider this a sign of weakness and they don't want to show it. So I ended up drafting a whole report that was really not needed, and I think I learned a big lesson then.
I was just I wanted to ask. I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to ask if there was a particular experience where maybe this lesson was cemented for you. So I'm glad you brought that up. Uh, when uh, what was kind of going through your mind after that report was kind of published, or what was the feedback that you got from other people during that experience?
I mean, a lot of the feedback was definitely slow down. It was a good, as we call, fire drill. So I mean, never, let a good crisis go to waste, as we say in the security field. So it was really a learning experience, not only to slow down but evaluate those sources, but also kind of more than that, like I said in the beginning, is understanding who the players are in the situation. And even if you are gathering information from that, you know original source, still understand that they have motives and that you have to analyze, even that reporting, even if it's a reliable source.
Gotcha. You've kind of mentioned through the course of your answers now. There's been two kind of major mistakes that you kind of mentioned: single sourcing and then taking the time to understand the players. So I want to kind of dive into each one of those maybe a bit individually and see if we can unpack some other common mistakes that might come across when you're rushing through your reports. Can you tell me a little bit more about single sourcing and what are the consequences of that, and then what are some things that analysts can do to mitigate that issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm just preaching to the choir because security professionals, every analyst, like this is analysis 101. You do not want a single source. I think, bringing information just from one source is really like, even if it's true information, it's just not, comprehensive enough a lot of times. No situation in the security field is as simple that you can rely just on one source. There are always two sides to every story. There are always like additional details that you can gather. Also, like when we're looking at a breaking event in the security field, we're also trying to answer a lot of different questions. And there is absolutely no way that one source can answer that, even if it is the police department of that specific location where, as we mentioned, active shooting is going or something like that. So I think from the single sourcing part, we all know how important it is not only to have reliable sources, but multiple sources.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of OSINT 101, but it's always good to kind of rehash and review
Yeah.
from time to time. Um, I kind of imagine, I'm just going to push back a little bit and say, I can imagine a situation where, maybe there's a situation breaking and decision makers that have, employed the analyst team are kind of pushing to get information, quickly. I'm sure that comes up quite often. How in that kind of a situation, how would you kind of balance the need to get the information out fast versus verifying? What kind of process do you have for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's important is to say what we know, and to say what we don't know, because that way, when you're reporting what you know and you're reporting what you don't know, and to end it with "we are still evaluating and we will update as soon as we have new information," is really putting those decision makers who are getting a lot of pressure from up top to at ease, knowing that the team is looking into the situation. And also, when you're reporting something, if you do see information that you're not 100% sure but you need to get it out, it's also, one way to report it is to say unconfirmed sources are reporting XYZ. That's okay as long as it's not something, completely bogus. if it's unconfirmed, it's unconfirmed. A lot of times the media does that, unconfirmed reports of a shooting at X location. But really, reporting what you don't know, knowing, to answer the who, what, when, where, how, and why is really important in every, breaking event.
Gotcha. And I got to imagine that's going to build up your credibility as an analyst
Yeah.
too, with decision makers. I mean, I was thinking about the events that happened this weekend in Russia. They're going to be old news by the time this podcast comes out with the
Highly
coup
doubt that it's
attempt.
going to be old news. It's a hot potato, but
Yeah,
yeah.
at the moment, we'll see what's going on in Ukraine by the time
That
this
is
show
a
comes out.
whole different podcast we can talk about.
Yeah, yeah. But I was just thinking, the best analyst that I was watching for. I mean, like, what's going on in the Kremlin right now in Russia? It's so vague. We just have Telegram channels and stuff like that for figuring, and some uh, videos and things that are coming out on Twitter and stuff. And that was, what all the best analysts are doing. Is like, here's what we're seeing, but then also kind of qualifying it with, it's the sketchy sources, and we don't really know at this moment. It's
Right.
definitely a best practice.
Yeah, but another thing about this particular situation is that a lot of good analysts who have subject matter expertise on Russia and the Kremlin, or specifically, there are people who have written books and analyzed Putin, are able to also do a little bit of that, background and psychological analysis and really understand who the players are and what's the background, and historically kind of try to predict the next moves. Obviously, it's not guaranteed, but there is, something we always use in analysis, again, preaching to the choir, but the probability of something happening is also important.
I want to take this conversation in a slightly different direction. I kind of want to go to maybe speak to some of the newer OSINT analysts that are trying to break into the field, and pick your brain a little bit and give some advice for them. Could you talk a little bit, if you had the chance right now to talk to younger Anna from maybe 5-10 years ago, just breaking into OSINT, what advice would you provide her?
That's a big one. I think there are a lot of points. I think the biggest advice is really like taking a pause, um, and arming yourself in advance with the best sources. So in time of crisis, kind of what to do. Also, one thing that I learned is, having a really good communication plan, because sometimes we come into situations where there are too many cooks in the kitchen, and it's really hard to kind of make sure that everybody is getting the information that they need at the time they need and all that. So I think those are the main two things I learned.
Can you tell me a little bit more? I'm kind of curious to dive in a bit more about a communication plan there. What does that look like, and in practice, as far deep as you can get into with that
Yeah,
kind of stuff?
absolutely. So, I mean, I think all security departments, whether you're government or corporate, we always have our crisis communication plans and all that. And we do our tabletops and we do exercises, and it's all, really good practices. But I think, when the situation breaks and we have to rush, sometimes we're like find ourselves being a little bit all over the place in our communication. So making sure that you have, I guess, one representative from each group that needs to be at the table for that particular breaking event, and making sure that they're communicating in one central channel. I think that is key, because having different communication channels gets so confusing. Um, yeah.
Well, I think, like I just imagine it with just work day to day. I mean, you have Slack, email, a million other things. So yeah, getting everyone on board beforehand is going to solve a lot of issues
Yeah.
when things are going down.
And one of the things is that that's, I think, in my personal opinion, it's the job of the intelligence department to gather all the raw intelligence, to clean it up, even when we're rushing and when it's really quick. Still, you can still do it, and gather it, clean up the intelligence, and analyze it, package it up in the whatever template your organization prefers, whatever language your organization prefers. If you need to add maps because your leadership likes maps, if you need to show distances to important, locations, then do that really quick and disseminate it from that one source.
Gotcha. Well, that gets in, and I've had a number of analysts now on the show talking about the importance of not just being a good analyst and understanding geopolitics or whatever, but also understanding your decision makers that your customer essentially that's
Yeah.
preparing this reporting for. I'd be curious also to hear because that's such an under discussed part in the OSINT community. We see so much on the tools and the techniques, which is very well discussed everywhere online, but this is kind of a part that's I feel like is a lot less well talked about. What kind of advice do you have for someone who's kind of starting to go up the ranks and for dealing with decision makers and creating intelligence reports um, that is going to speak to decision makers and allow them to make the best decision possible and feel
Yeah.
like your reporting is valuable?
Absolutely. So in order to build that credibility, which you mentioned before, and also just understand your audience, I think there are two key things. One is gathering really good intelligence requirements. So as you come to your department, to your organization, meeting with your stakeholders at first, and then meeting, as frequently as you feel is necessary to refresh those and asking them those really good questions. So asking good questions to get those answers of what keeps them up at night, what are they concerned about, um, what are some things that they're looking into the future that could impact your company, your organization, your department, your agency. The other thing is, I think that is really important, and sometimes we forget, is to really understand everybody's risk tolerance. I think we all have different risk tolerances, and in security field, we all come from different backgrounds, and some of us have done some, really crazy things in the sense of like our risk tolerance is really high because we have been in, high risk areas. But we need to understand that sometimes our customers in the business, the risk tolerance is very low. So it's really important to learn what the risk tolerance is where you are, and to take your risk tolerance and just leave it at home, not in a bad way. Our experiences in high risk areas are very important, but sometimes our risk tolerance really prevents us from making those judgments of what is going to be applicable and what's going to be impactful for the specific organization and department or agency where we are.
We're kind of wrapping up to all the time that I promised to steal from you today, Anna. What's the main takeaway that you want listeners to remember from our conversation?
I think I said it like maybe 100 times during the podcast, but a tactical pause will go a long way. Take a deep breath, step away for a second if you need to, literally for a second. If it is an emergency, it is an emergency, even though you're not a first responder, but just pause. I think that's really important.
Is there any way for listeners to get in touch if they want to reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'll share the link with you. And I think I should have started with it, but I will end with this. Everything I said is totally just my opinion and my experience throughout the years, not, the opinion of the company I work for.
Anna, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Rob.